I'm really honored to have a colleague, a friend, a person that I share a lot of, and he is one of a kind, and he is an amazing human being and even amazing professional. So he been working from the Euro 2024 all the way to Everton, crime reporter, lecturer, journalist, fan TV producer. He has done everything. Okay. And then, without further ado, I need to do a proper introduction, bad idea for podcast style. Okay. So get ready. Please welcome. He is the pride and joy of Derby, England, United Kingdom. Neil Roberts.
Wow. Thank you, Juan. Muchas gracias.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good.
You know,
It's
have
a
you
pleasure to
ever
have you.
have you ever considered a career as a ring announcer for all the big boxing matches? You could do that.
I mean, if there's any chance and if there's anyone looking for a Mexican ring announcer in
Yeah.
English
What's Let's
and in
Get Ready to
Germany,
Rumble? What's Let's Get Ready to Rumble in Spanish?
es- prepárense para la pelea.
There you go.
I can do it, but I mean, it sounds way better in English sometimes. I will try to do it in German, but it doesn't gonna sound as awesome as in English, to be honest. Uh, Neil, it's a true honor and true pleasure to have you today on the podcast because as I told, I know you personally, as I know you as a colleague and as a friend, and always you seem to be that guy that know and have pretty much all the answers to everything.
Oh, I
I mean, you
wish.
always be.
I wish.
I mean, you always look like really calm, steady. Everything that is in your control, you're like, okay, no worries, I got it. I will find it. I will find a solution, and I will do this and that. So I'm gonna start from the last part, right from the end. Your last tournament, or like your biggest tournament, your latest biggest tournament was the Euro 24 here in Germany last year. Do you remember a moment that stick to your head until today, like more than a year later?
From the tournament itself or
Yes.
from working on the tournament?
I mean, both.
I think it was my second tournament. So the first one was Euro 2020, which became Euro 2021, and I went to Azerbaijan, worked in Baku, and I produced the fan TV coverage there. And there was a real big moment in that tournament, which we may come on to later in the podcast. But in Germany, in Düsseldorf, I just remember how friendly the environment was, I think. And you're very kind, Juan. It's an absolute honor to be here on your podcast. Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you, man.
And it's a privilege to be here with you, talking with you again about it. But you said some very kind things there. You said that I always seem to have the answers and I was very calm. A lot of people who know me would probably say, that doesn't sound like the Neil I know. But that to me was testament to the environment that we had. You know, it was super friendly environment. It was so professional. We had people on the team, the editorial and the technical operations staff from all over the world, from Mexico, from England, from Russia, from France, from Switzerland, from Italy, you name it. And it was just a pure joy for me at a time when the world seems to be fragmenting. The world seems to be fragmenting. There's a lot of division in the world, without wishing to get too political about it. So it was a real joy for me to see people from all over the world coming together to work together. And when you have an environment like that, which is mutually supportive, people just trying to be professional, loving working on the tournament, really enjoying being there, in a great country. Germany is so welcoming to overseas visitors, on a superb tournament, fantastic football, you can't not be professional and, in a way, calm and wanting to find those answers and solutions. So I don't know if I have one particular moment from the tournament itself, because strangely, for every major editorial, sporting, or news event I've worked on, strangely, it all worked super smoothly. Super smoothly. And I think that's because of the environment that you and your colleagues, that we all created together, and it was really harmonious, and I loved every minute of it.
I must agree on that. I must agree on that because, as you said, everyone came from a different part of the world, and everyone was working together to the same goal, which was deliver high expectations and high profile games to the fans and like flawlessly. So I mean, I am agree with you. Now, Neil, I want to start looking into your journey and into your career. Do you remember the time, or when was the time when you fell in love with sports, and in particular football?
Well, it would have been when I was a kid, a little boy. My family and I and my sister, we moved to Bermuda, which is a very small island in the North Atlantic. Tiny, tiny island. You can't even see it on the map. It's just a little pinprick. And we moved there because my father got a job as the sports editor on the national paper there. And I used to come, finish my school day as a sort of 7-year-old boy, finish my school day, go into the newspaper office, sit next to his desk, and start just bashing away on the typewriter. Just making up my own stories, writing stories. At the same time that that was happening, I became more and more aware that we were exiled from the UK. We weren't exiled, we weren't exiled. We weren't
Yeah.
forced to leave, but we were expatriates in Bermuda from the UK. So I was interested in reconnecting with home, and my dad was a huge Everton football supporter. So I would start to follow the results and see who my favourite players were. And then the 1982 World Cup happened in Spain. And I would have been 10 years old, nearly 11. And I just remember falling in love, watching it on TV, falling in love with Paolo Rossi, the Italian striker, sadly died not too long ago. And I just thought, what an absolute iconic footballer he was. Good looking, stylish. They had that great Azzurri kit. He scored, I think he was the leading scorer in that tournament. And I remember after, I think he scored against Brazil, or it may have been in the final, and I remember running around the garden with a football, age 10, just pretending somehow that I was Paolo Rossi. So I'm going to go with Paolo Rossi. I don't support Italy. I'm an England supporter and an Everton supporter. But that man, his presence in that tournament, his performances, his charisma, he had such wonderful charisma on the football pitch, that really intoxicated me. And I think that shows, we've just been talking about the last Euros tournament, that shows the power of football and what football can do. No matter what country people are from, it can really inspire young kids.
Yeah, that's true. And because my next question it was about to be like who was like your biggest inspiration, but I can um, think a little bit that was Paolo Rossi first of all, and then your dad, right?
That's
I
true.
mean, do you
Yeah.
do you remember some story that you write or you wrote on that typewriter, like along your dad when you were in Bermuda? Bermuda?
I don't remember a particular story, but I do remember making things up. I would pretend that Everton won the league, or the FA Cup, or England won the World Cup, and I would just, I'd make up these
Yeah, yeah,
stories
yeah.
which won't come true, you know. But I would just, I just write these stories, and I suppose when you realize, and perhaps at age 10 I didn't quite realize, but when you realize that you're not going to be good enough to be a professional footballer, You know, you're not quite good enough to do that. When you realize that, what's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing is to write about it or to work in that sector. I wanted to be a journalist. That was all I ever wanted to do. You're quite right. My father really was my inspiration. But yeah, helped along the way by a certain Paolo Rossi.
Nice. Now, for you, like you've been in different roles, right? We spoke about it, like reporter, crime reporter,
Yeah.
or crime journalist, which amazed me to be honest, because I can never make the connection between one thing and another. You know, I mean, can you explain a little bit about that? Because and then I
Yes.
continue with this one.
Yes, I can. And I don't want to give away. I know you're going to ask me later about a bad decision, which turned into a good one. So I don't want to give too much away. But my first job after training as a journalist was to be a reporter for the Liverpool Echo. And I was in a graduate trainee position. So I was working on the Echo, which was the evening paper, and its sister paper, which was then called the Daily Post. I was working in news, I was working in sport, taking on different roles. And I worked my way up. And after 2 years, just 2 years of being there, they offered me the job of crime reporter. Now, Liverpool is not quite Mexico City, you know,
Yeah.
but it's got a reputation, rightly or wrongly, for a lot of crime. Obviously,
Yeah.
there was a lot of poverty in Liverpool in the post-war period, certainly in the 80s and onwards. Industrial decay, a lot of unemployment, and gang crime. There was gang crime in Liverpool, and actually, it was impressed on me by the news editor at the time, who was a big Liverpool supporter, a guy called John Thompson, who was a big Liverpool supporter, and he said to me, he said, if you're not going to cover Liverpool or Everton on this paper, the next best job is to be the crime reporter. Because the city then really was famous for three
Yeah.
things, which was football, music, of course, because of the Beatles, uh, and unfortunately, and perhaps unfairly, crime. But it was a fascinating, fascinating job, and it opened my eyes. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Because I wanted to ask you this. I mean, the background that you have is so unique, so interesting. So, do you ever face any creative or storytelling challenges that you need to overcome during your career?
Challenges with telling particular stories.
Yeah, because I mean, if because I mean, with all the ignorance that I have right now, it's like I can imagine as a crime reporter, if you have like the breaking news, and then you need to find out different pieces to extend that news, right?
Yeah.
And then it becomes like bigger and bigger, and then a little bit like
Oh
eye
yeah.
catching, you know, and then
And
you can replicate that in sports.
and
But
and
do
and
you ever face like something like challenges there?
you know what? As a crime reporter, it can be scary
Yeah.
because you're often doing stories about serious people. And I remember doing one about a convicted gangster who'd been murdered in Liverpool, and I covered his inquest. And his grandmother, who was probably in her 70s, rang me up in the office and said, "I'm worried about you." And I said, "What do you mean you're worried about me?" She said, "I'm worried about you writing all those things in the paper." She said, "I'm really worried about you." And I'm not going to lie, Juan, I went home that night. I used to get the bus home and I was looking over my shoulder. I was like, are people following me? What's going on? So there are always challenges that a journalist in sport or news or any discipline, there are always challenges that you'll face as a journalist. All I can say is you have to rely on your own journalistic integrity, and that is to operate fairly, accurately, and with balance and impartiality, you know. And always ask yourself before you write anything, and this is what I tell my students because I'm a lecturer now, always ask yourself, what is the story? Before you do anything, ask yourself, what is the story? And then tell it. It's not rocket science, and it's not a fine art. I say to my students, this isn't art. This is a skill people can learn. It's a skill. I can't paint like Monet, or Renoir or Picasso. Maybe I could, because he puts all the bits of the face in the
Yeah,
wrong
different.
place. But it's not an art. These are skills that can be learned. You know this. You know this from your own training and your own background. They're skills that can be learned. But I think as long as you rely on your journalistic integrity, you back yourself. You'll always be okay.
Okay. Because I wanted to, I always have the impression that sometimes in sports, I mean, I can never consider myself or call myself a sports journalist because I'm not. I never study journalist. I'm more a communication specialist and a line producer and TV producer. But sometimes, and hearing you, I was like coming to my mind that sometimes you need to draw up a line until which point you want to reach when you're telling a story, right? Even in sports.
Yeah, and that depends on who you're doing it for. So and it depends on what your platform is, but particularly who your audience is. Who I just said a minute ago, always ask yourself what's the story. The second question is why is it important? And the why it's important, that tells you who your audience is, who you're writing that story for, or who are you telling that TV story for, or who you're doing the podcast for, who you're doing that radio story for. It doesn't matter. Who are you telling it for? So when we were working for UEFA last year, quite clearly there was a line. There were editorial lines. We were covering the matches on TV in the stadium. Other colleagues we were working with were doing it for international broadcast. We were doing it inside the stadium. What UEFA expected for the audience inside the stadium differed to what they expected for the audience on global TV coverage, right? Because obviously inside the stadium, the action must be focused really on the pitch. Anything on the screens is incidental. So there were things like if there were political figures or
Yeah.
particularly famous people, we would be expected not to show them within the arena, just in case of a bad reaction or the
Yeah.
attention being diverted away from the football. Around the world, in the comfort of people's living rooms when they're watching the football on TV, it's not a problem. So that line is always determined by your audience, but a good journalist, for me, always pushes that line.
I want to know how you balance storytelling and entertainment because you being from the UK, you being in Dusseldorf last year, you having the game England Switzerland with the England royalty or the UK royalty in the stadium, right? Do you push that line and you're like, you know what, we need to show them, or
No,
we cannot show them because it's
no,
going to be too political?
that one I couldn't, and we were under express orders that we couldn't, and it's disappointing. But you have to understand it as a journalist. You have to understand who your employers are and who you are working for. That said, the storytelling on the pitch for fan TV, for instance, and to supplement what's going on in the crowd, sport provides such a rich tapestry, doesn't it, of entertainment. You talk about striking that balance between sport and entertainment. I think the sport itself really ought to be the entertainment. The only time we really need to worry about whether we're coming away from the sport, because the sport's entertainment in its own right, the only time we really need to worry about that is if a news story develops. So a news story could develop, and then if you're an independent journalist, I mean not working for UEFA Fan TV, but an independent journalist working on an international broadcaster or something like that, and maybe there's crowd trouble. You think back to the Champions League final when all of the Liverpool fans were found couldn't get in because of the ticket problems, or maybe there's some kind of disaster, which obviously is awful, but it happens. You remember Euro 2020, which 2021, when Christian Eriksen almost died on the pitch. You know, they're the moments when the sport has to take a back seat. You know, I had a boss once who said to me that football was the most important of all the unimportant things.
That's absolutely true.
And I
Yep.
think that that is a good way of putting it. There, if there is a big news story, it usurps the football. But beyond that, certainly working for Fan TV, I didn't have to worry too much about balancing the football with the entertainment because the football was entertaining enough.
Okay. And you mentioned it this, which is like really interesting. And then there's so many people wondering what a fan TV producer do. Because when I was speaking with some other colleagues from Mexico, like, you know what, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna interview this huge fan TV producer, and they were like,
What is that?
but what is that? Because
What is
I
that?
mean, the name itself is like, okay, you're producing something for the fans, but
Yeah,
can you
sure.
can you explain a little bit more about that one?
I'll try. I suppose at a big international tournament like the Euros, um, it's a huge thing for people to be able to get tickets to go to one of those matches, and so very often the ground people will go into the ground as soon as the gates open. As soon as the gates open, UEFA wanted obviously some content to entertain and engage the fans. Now, the truth is, it's also a huge opportunity for UEFA to provide extra exposure for the sponsors, right? So whoever the sponsors are, their sort of advertising slots, etc. And they pay a lot of money for this tournament, and they pay a lot of money for all of the showcasing around it and all that entertainment, that razzmatazz. You know, that's not really possible without the sponsors' money. So UEFA, quite rightly, understandably, need to find a home for all of that content. But what we don't want to do is we want to have some editorial credibility, and this is where that line between the football and entertainment comes in. Actually, we want to have some credibility. We can't just play a whole stream of adverts before the match because then people will be turned off. So alongside the adverts, there are things like player interviews, manager interviews, shots, beautiful shots, aerial shots of the stadium, the other venues around the country for the Euros that were in Germany. And then at a certain point before kickoff, um, maybe it's about an hour and a half till kickoff, the team buses start to leave the hotels. So there's helicopter or drone shots, you know, so that we can track the buses, and then that builds that sense of excitement. So suddenly, then you're not just producing live. I should have said it's live TV basically, but
Yes.
in the stadium. But you're not just producing live TV full of adverts. You're producing live TV, which yes has those commercial messages within them, but which is also starting to build that sense of excitement for the fans who are there. So you're seeing the buses arriving, and then when the buses arrive, the players all get off the bus. There are camera operators who you were working with them, and they were tracking the players as they walked off. They walk straight out onto the pitch. They start to have a look around the pitch from both teams, and then of course you get applause, and then suddenly it all becomes one. You know what's happening on the screens there is having a sort of an effect, a visceral effect on the people who are there in the stadium. And then they go in, and then a little while later they come out for the warm-ups, and then the warm-ups are shown, and then we do all the team lineups and the announcements and everything else. Plus, there's a big responsibility in Fan TV. It's not just that build-up show. We also have to announce the teams. So we announce the teams to the entire stadium. We have to play the anthems, and that was if you want to ask me about a particularly challenging time, ask me about that in 2021. But we have to play the anthems, which is a big responsibility. And then during the match, we have to announce all of the substitutions, the additional time, and then
Oh, the names.
yeah, exactly. And then there is obviously a short program in the halftime, and then a post-match program as well with the sponsors, man of the match, doing an interview and everything else alongside it. So it's a big responsibility. It's a mix of journalism, marketing, some public relations, but it's all building up the excitement in a live TV format within the stadium on match day.
Okay, I will put it this way, like you are kind of a master of ceremonies
Yes, indeed.
inside the
Yeah,
stadium.
I mean, I should also say it wasn't me personally making the announcements. I was producing the content. We had an announcer. We had an announcer to do that, but he would make them in German and English and or depending on the teams playing the sort of the
Yeah.
home language.
Okay, that's pretty cool and that's pretty amazing. And as you said, and like you're building up the atmosphere,
Exactly.
right? So during that time, like during that tournament or in Baku or during your entire journey and career, do you ever feel that was one particular moment that you said, this is why I'm doing this? This is why I love sport. This is why I love my profession.
Yeah, and that would have been the moment which was the hardest and highest pressure. And I'll take you back now to 2021 in Baku, and we were doing the match between Turkey and Wales. And my boss at the IBC, UEFA IBC, she said to me, Neil, we have, just to warn you, this is the day before, she said, just to warn you, she said, we have 3 presidents coming to tomorrow's match. I said, what? She said, yes, the president of UEFA, Alexander Chefrin, is coming. She said, the president of Azerbaijan is coming. And so is the president of Turkey, President Erdogan. Okay. So this is a serious guy. And only not long before the tournament, as an international football team, Turkey became Turkiye. So Turkey changed from Turkey, the English spelling, to Turkiye internationally, wanted to be known as that. They also slightly, ever so slightly, changed the national anthem. And so just before the match, maybe a day before the match, we had some communication from the Turkish FA that the anthem that we had that was due to be played was wrong and
No.
must be changed. And of course, President Erdogan was coming to the match.
Yes.
Right.
Wow.
So it was quite frantic in terms of getting delivery of this new version of the anthem, making sure all the old versions were deleted, making sure everybody on the team knew exactly what was due to be played and when. And of course, in such a sort of chaotic environment, that's where mistakes can happen. And, you know, we've all seen it. You go on YouTube and you'll find it, international matches and players sort of looking at each other like this when the...
Like this is not the
This
one.
is not our anthem. This is the other team's anthem or whatever.
Yeah,
And that would be the worst thing, wouldn't it? So I remember when the players came out, they walked out, they lined up, we'd finished the lineups, and then we played the anthems. And I remember when the Turkish anthem played at the correct point and it was the correct version, I remember punching the air like this. I punched the air, I was like, yes! But you know what? Those challenges, and that was a big challenge, but that's exactly why I do it. Because that adrenaline, when that adrenaline pumps, you can't beat that. You can't beat that feeling. And yes, it's a lot of pressure, but the sort of being able to rise to the challenge, the reward is greater than the fear of getting something wrong.
Okay. Wow. I mean, I cannot imagine the pressure, and I cannot imagine how high your heart was pumping when you got like, okay, roll the anthem in 3, 2. I mean,
I'll be honest,
I cannot imagine.
I was nervous. I didn't want to get thrown into a jail cell in Azerbaijan.
Of course not.
But it worked.
No one. Yeah. I mean, no one. I will say so. Then for you, how you celebrate that victory is something that people should do because it's something that people doesn't see on the stadium. It's not like people who say like, you know what, the guy who's doing the anthems made a good work because they have this and this context. So people doesn't know it. I mean, they're like, just playing the anthem. That's it. Could be, and I would quote unquote, will be the easiest task for the people outside. without knowing all the context, right? But what I want to know is what was one of the characteristics that you have at that time that you think that all people who want to work in sports should have?
Well, by all means, enjoy that moment. But remember, so that happened for me just before the match was about to kick off. Now that was great, and that was the thing that could have the worst thing that could have gone wrong, and it didn't go wrong. So by all means, enjoy that moment. But you've got to keep switched on, because obviously the match was about to start, and that's not the end of our job. Our job doesn't finish until, I don't know, an hour after the final whistle. So you have to remain professional throughout. You can take it as a small win and go, that was great. I'll celebrate that later. And then you celebrate it later, right? We're in the bar or whatever. But no, it's so important to remain switched on and remain professional throughout, because your job is not done until the end.
Okay, perfect. Then, um, knowing you and your journey, what's something that you would like to know about storytelling 10 years ago? Something that you know now?
Oh, well, I suppose for me, 10 years ago, I was already very experienced. So I guess I have to change your question slightly. And
Okay, I will rephrase it. I
yeah,
will rephrase it like 20 years
yeah,
ago.
go back to maybe at the start of my career.
Yeah.
And I guess I was a little bit idealistic, and I didn't. I'm lucky in that I've got a good news sense. I know what a story is. I just kind of know what one is instinctively, and I'm lucky to have that instinct. But maybe I took it a little bit for granted, and I think what I would say is, when I was very young and going into the profession, and I thought, I've made it, I've got it, like, and it's a bit cocky. That attitude is a little bit cocky. And when you get cocky, you can slip and you can make mistakes, and actually you can think that you're invincible, and you're not, you know. So I suppose what I would say to myself, and it is about storytelling and it isn't, but I think I would say to myself, just remain humble. Always remain humble, no matter how far you are through your career. And my career started 30 years ago, but no matter how far you are through your career, there's always, always, always something you can learn. And I'm still learning. I'm learning now doing this podcast with you. You can always learn something. And I think that the advice that I would have given myself and I would give others is, never think that you've just nailed it, because you haven't. Always remain humble.
Okay. It's a good advice, to be honest. And then do you remember one mistake that you made at the beginning of your career and how you solved it?
Yes.
I mean, if you can share it. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes, I did a story on the Liverpool Echo about a man rang in, and I took the call, and he said he wanted to find his father, because it's not a sports story. He said, I want to find my father. He said, because my father was a bingo caller. You know the game we have in England, bingo. It's like
Yeah.
you pick the numbers, and then if you get a line, you get a prize, and if you get the whole grid, you get a bigger prize. And people used to do
Yeah.
it in like working class cities like Liverpool. Used to, especially older people, go along and do bingo. And his father was a bingo caller, and he offered his newborn son, as a bingo prize.
No
Yeah.
way.
So if you get the house, bingo, you can have my baby. He wanted to give his baby
Oh,
away. And so this fella rang in and said, I want to find my father who did this. No, it was obviously,
because I want to punch him in the
it
face.
was, well, yeah, I suppose. And it was obviously a story that his mother had told him, or his family had told him, and I think his mother maybe had died. And the front page headline on the Liverpool Echo that day was, I was a bingo baby. And that was the story. Anyway, about 2 days later, the news desk said, Neil, I had to go up to the news desk. We've had a call from that guy's father's lawyer. So his father had been in touch via his lawyer. He said, that's not what happened. That is not what happened. So I had to go and see the lawyer, And of course, I was worried that, well, am I going to get sued for defamation, right, for libel? I mean, I had a defence because the story was published in good faith, and that was the story that the boy, who is now a man, had been told all of his life.
Okay.
So it was fine, and we printed a sort of a redressing story with an interview with the father, and then actually the two of them got together. So it was a very happy outcome. But it was a huge mistake early in my career that could have gone it could have gone worse.
Completely, yeah, yeah, I can understand. I mean, for me, I will say today I will put the headline BING gone.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean, that's me and my
yeah,
Mexican humor. I
yeah.
don't know. Like, I mean, I don't want to put myself on the spot to be sued,
But
so
no,
I'm gonna leave it like
this is the other
that.
thing. So you asked a minute ago about the advice I'd have given myself or would give others, and I talked about
Yeah,
being humble. And I think the other one is resilient. Be resilient. People will make mistakes. People do make mistakes. We're not robots. We're human beings. As long as you're prepared to correct your mistake, it goes along with that humility that I talked about. Then you will be okay. But you can't expect to go through a long career and not make mistakes, and that was a big one.
okay. Speaking about mistakes, because in journalism, in sports, and in life in general, people are going to make mistakes, as you pointed out. But when you realize that you made a mistake and probably you have that feeling of failure in yourself, how can you overcome it as a professional?
You have to just remind yourself that as long as you're acting in good faith, with the best of intentions, honestly, you're acting honestly. You're not trying to be malicious. You're not trying to deceive people. You're not dealing in fake news. You might have got something factually wrong, but you're not trying to mislead people. And as long as you're prepared to correct that, at the earliest opportunity, then you have to cut yourself some slack because you are a human being. You've got to forgive yourself.
And now for your students, because you're a lecturer as well for sports journalism, so for your students, um, what's one common mistake that every young journalist is making today, and how can they fix it?
Well, I feel that far too many, and I've got some great students, and they might be listening. So when you put this out there, they might listen. And I've got some great students, but I always say to them, it's not so much your mark that I'm worried about. Now that might sound really strange for a lecturer to say that, because I want them to get the best mark that they can achieve. Obviously, if they can achieve a really high mark, that's great. If they're only just barely passing, okay. But for me, the most important thing, and I've hired a lot of graduates, is the attitude and the approach of the person in front of me. I'm far more interested in their approach, how much they want the career, their people skills, what they're prepared to do. Are they prepared to show that resilience and determination to go and get a story? I fear that too many young people, and I'm sure this is the same the world over, just expect things to land in their lap. And they're going to go and get their degree, and then they're going to get a job, and that's the way it is. Well, journalism, and particularly sports journalism, is really, really competitive, because so many people like you and me who couldn't quite be professional footballers, what's the next best thing? And so that means it's really competitive. So you've got to
Yeah.
want it. So the biggest mistake that I see them making is actually not grasping that. It's about their attitude and approach above everything else.
Okay. And then, if you think about that, there's so many people who wanted to have this job, people who want to have your job, my job, Thomas, or everyone who was working at UEFA during the Euro or during the FIFA World Cup. How can these people say, you know what, I want to invest all my time in this profession, but like, what's like one piece of advice that you can give to them and say, you know what, this is at least like the grassroots that you need to have in order to
Sure.
aspire to work
It's
there.
about two things: networking and experience. So, for
Okay.
instance, you're doing this podcast right now. People could do podcasts. People can write blogs. People can do videography and put it up on YouTube. Nothing nowadays will stop anybody from being a journalist if they want to be one. Produce content, and then Go and meet people and get experience. Where do you want to work, or what sector do you want to work in? Who are the outlets that are doing, providing those jobs, offering those jobs? Get in touch with them. Never write "Dear Sir" or "Madam." Never write "To whom it may concern." That just shows that you've done no research and you're just sending off letter after letter. Find out who you're writing to. Get on the phone to them. You know, again, people nowadays, they don't seem to like using their phones for talking to people. Talk to people and see if you can go and get some experience. So it's networking and experience, which you can do yourself and you can do in the professional environment.
How much does sports journalism has changed? Because you mentioned networking and, I mean, gather some experience. But how much does sports journalism has changed with social media and AI?
Yeah, dramatically. It's changed dramatically with, well, let's start with social media. It's changed dramatically with social media. Social media was not around when I started my journalism career. News organizations, sports organizations, they expect you to be versatile now. So you can't be a one-trick pony. You can't be, I'm just a writer, I'm just video, I'm just podcasting. You've got to also have a presence and an understanding of social media platforms. That's so important. AI, of course, is now emerging. So that's the next challenge. If you think about journalism and the history of journalism, though, it's always responded to changes in technology. Always. It started with the printing press, and then there was photography, and then there was radio, and then there was TV, and then there was color TV, and then there was the web, and then there was social media. Okay, so it's, and now there's AI. Okay, and already you're seeing newsrooms are looking for AI reporters. But AI, for me, won't ever completely replace the person. AI will be good for data gathering, and it will be good for helping you put thoughts in order and doing research. But journalism is nothing if it's not authentic. We need authentic people's stories for journalism to thrive. So we have to learn, and this is still now developing and emerging, we have to learn how to work with AI in the future. Okay. So these are new challenges for the new generation of journalists.
Do you remember one story in particular in sports for you that make you or like pushed you a little bit to tears because it was so emotional, the story that you were writing on?
That pushed me to tears.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I don't know if there's one that pushed me to tears, but I will tell you about one story which really reminded me again of why being a sports journalist is a great privilege. And it would have pushed many people to tears. It didn't push me to tears, but it would have pushed many people to tears. And it was the day that Ian Rush left Liverpool. Ian Rush, Liverpool's record goal scorer, left Liverpool. Now, I support Everton, the cross-city rivals. And when the news desk said, "Can you go and interview Ian Rush?" He's announced he's going to leave Liverpool. I was like, really? Anyway, so I went first thing in the morning, and he lived in a big mansion, and it was one of these places where there was a long drive, and there was like an intercom at the end of the drive. So I rang the buzzer, and he answered, and I said who I was, and would he give me an interview, and he said no. And this is like 8:30 in the morning, and I thought, like, one thing, as a journalist can't go back to the desk without the story.
Nope.
But he said, but I can do it in 20 minutes. I've got to take the kids to school. So I was like, okay, great. And then he came back, he gave me the interview. It was an exclusive. I've still got the picture of me interviewing him. I mean, he's a legend. Ian Rush is a legend. And the headline, and I'm not sure I entirely agreed with the headline because it was an opinion, but the headline, front page of the Echo, was "The Greatest." The greatest, and it was Ian Rush on the front page. So that to me was a couple of things. It proved to me that you have to put all of your own personal opinions and biases aside if you're going to be a journalist or a sports journalist. Put them to one side and just do the job of telling the story, but also the power of storytelling. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me emotional, right? But I think it would have made a lot of people emotional, that story.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask you that one because, as I told you, like during this podcast, I never consider, and I will never consider myself a sports journalist. But when you're dealing with live news as a live producer or as a linear producer, you face so many breaking news. And I remember one in particular, and I want to have your take on this because was I think was 2017. So we were having this live sports news show, Sports Center, and then all of a sudden we started receiving news from Brazil. Something was happening, something happened, something happened, something happened, and then people start getting a little bit anxious, right? And then we all of a sudden knew that one plane carrying players, families, and reporters from Brazil Chapecoense team had crashed.
I remember the story.
I mean, I still like telling about the story and got
I
goosebumps because it
remember.
was
Yeah.
until which moment you start like stretching the line of this is news. People need to know about this.
Yeah.
And then I remember four survivors. And then at that moment, I'm not proud of this, but at that moment was like, okay, I want to have emotions, I want to have theories, I want to have people crying, I want to have that because it's something that's going to be engaged with people, like something that people can relate with the tragedy that happened. But now reflecting on it, I want to know your opinion because for me it's like pushing too
You
much,
feel bad
I
about
would say.
that. Well,
Yeah.
I've done this in news. I worked on the July 7 bombings in 2005 in London. I didn't work on the story. Well, I sort of did. With the 2001 Twin Towers, when they came down, I was working for Meridian TV in the southeast of England. So all the regional TV that day was cancelled because of this huge story. But of course, in the days afterwards, we were looking for people who had relatives there, who had work colleagues there, who had connections, and of course, you are then becoming part of that story. You did ask me a minute ago, and it's very similar to what you've just described with that plane crash, and I remember that plane crash. But you asked me a minute ago about a sports story which made me emotional. Now, it makes me very emotional now, if I think about it, and I teach it. But on the day, it was the Hillsborough disaster. So April the 15th, 1989, ultimately 97 people died in an FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest not because of any kind of crowd trouble, not because of any kind of violence, but because of a crush. And these were the times of hooliganism. There were fences around stadiums in England. There were sort of pens on banks of terracing, not seated. And people were crushed. Liverpool fans were crushed to death. Now, I wasn't a professional journalist on that day, but I was working. I was at sixth form, which in England means you're in your I was in my second to last year at school, and I was working at the local radio station, the local BBC radio station that day, and Everton, my team, were in the other semi-final against Norwich in the FA Cup semi-final, and Liverpool playing Forest. And I was watching feeds, and in those days, live football was rare. There wasn't much live football. I was watching feeds of both matches, and I could see the fans spilling onto the pitch, and it became clear to me, before a lot of people in the world would have known, became clear to me that a terrible, terrible tragedy had happened. So I wasn't a professional journalist then, but I was already working as a journalist. It was 1989, and I was already at a local BBC station. I think when you are a journalist, there is a risk you become desensitized. There is a risk. Yeah. I think your professionalism, though, kicks in. It takes over. Your instinct is to tell the story. So whatever's happening, you want to tell the story. Now, in that plane crash story, I'm guessing, just as with Hillsborough, just as with the Twin Towers, just as with the July 7 bombings, you haven't got to push too hard because the emotion is just there. All we have to remind ourselves is that we are observers and we are reporting what's happened to the world. And that is a vital, vital job. Because if we don't know about these things, then there can be terrible cover-ups, there can be terrible injustices, there can be all sorts of corrupt and bad things happening if we don't tell those stories. we just don't need to push. We don't need to push our fingers into those open wounds. We can just let them happen. Because as human beings, which we also are, there's lots of time for us to reflect afterwards, as we are doing now. So I don't think you did anything wrong. I think you probably just let the story tell itself, but you had gone into professional mode while that was happening. And actually, that's the right thing to do, because telling that story has to be told. What's the alternative that doesn't get told? And then the emotion is part of it. The sheer enormity of what's happened is a key part of that story.
Yeah, I mean, in emotions, as you said, like run high every time you have a breaking news. I mean, you can tell any type of breaking news, and it's always you need to control your emotions, as you said, like to be more professional and to put the best story possible, but without like pushing certain limits, I will say, right?
Exactly right.
Neil, now we're gonna because we're almost through with the podcast, and we're gonna put like a little bit lighter
Okay.
on the podcast, right? So I want to ask you something because I know you're not a Liverpool fan,
Definitely not.
and and the last time I saw Liverpool live was in 2018 in Kiev, and it was like a completely chaos because they lose against Real Madrid 3-1, and they were sleeping on like the next morning they were like people sleeping in the airport in Ukraine, and it was poor fans, poor Liverpool fans. And I remember something. One of my best friends in Mexico, when I asked him like, "What do you prefer?" Because he's a huge Liverpool fan. What do you prefer, to have your team winning the Champions League because the next year they won it, eventually, or winning the Premier League? Because in my head, the Champions League is way bigger and way important. I think you can imagine the answer of this guy,
Yeah.
right? He was the Premier League. Well, like, but it's a local league.
Yeah.
No, but that you don't understand.
But I agree.
And for a Liverpool
I
fan,
agree with your friend. So
okay,
I don't want to upset my friends at UEFA if they're listening, because I'd like to work with you at the next Euros. And the Champions League is a wonderful tournament.
yes,
And obviously so's the Europa League, and all the European competitions are incredible. I think the first thing that any football club can set out to achieve in any given season is to be the champions of their own domain. I think that is for me, that's the first thing that any football team can ever set out to achieve. We are the best team in this country. Now, of course, winning the European Cup, the Champions League, is a
you're the best.
phenomenal
Yeah.
achievement, and you can absolutely argue that it's kind of bigger because it's the best of the best. You can absolutely argue that, but I feel it's a bonus. I feel that you
Okay.
start the season, if you're the manager of Liverpool or Arsenal or Real Madrid or PSG or Internazionale, I think at the start of the season, you're getting your players around you, and I think the fans would probably say this too. And you're saying, right, our aim this season, we're going to win the league, and then we're going to see where we go with everything else.
Okay.
So I agree with your friend.
Okay. Perfect. Because I put this question because I wanted to light up the tone, and then I want to ask you this: if your life, your career, and your journey have a soundtrack, which one will it be?
Yeah, Keep On Running by the Spencer Davis Group.
Okay, you got it like right. Okay.
Yeah. Because and it just speaks to the sort of the resilience. Keep on running. I do like my running. I'm not very good, but just keep going. Whatever you do, keep going. So it's Keep On Running by the Spencer Davis Group.
Okay, that's a pretty good one. And then I want to put you like I have three more questions before this. Okay, what there's if there's one element that you want to be remembered for, which would it be?
Professionally,
Professionally, yeah.
just somebody who I think someone who really knew what a story was and how to tell it.
Okay.
That for me is the essence of being a journalist.
Okay.
But also somebody who operated ethically. I think that's important. You can really want a story and you can know how to tell it, but is it right to tell the story? Now that gets us into a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, someone who knew what a story was and who knew how to tell it.
Okay. And then, um, You need to choose this or that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You didn't see that coming, but
I didn't.
okay, this or that. Early call or editing until midnight.
Oh. Well, that's hard because obviously I'm quite happy to be finishing early and going to the pub. But if the story requires it, then you have to edit till midnight. So I'll say that.
Okay. The perfect shot or control chaos.
This.
Okay. And then the last one is, well, second to last. Scripted or spontaneous?
That.
Okay.
Authenticity. It's always about
Yes.
authenticity. So spontaneity
Spontaneous.
is key.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is my favorite, to be honest. German kebabs or fish and chips.
Oh, no, that's hard. You know how much I love those German kebabs. You know how much I love going to Lucas Podolski's kebab shop. No, kebabs. I
Okay.
love fish and chips. I love fish and chips, but I'm going to go for the German kebabs.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question. What was a bad idea in your journey, in your life, or in your career that in the end turned out to be a good idea?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it was 1995, and I was a graduate trainee at the Liverpool Echo, and I had been working for 6 months at Everton for the Liverpool Echo, doing the Everton magazine. And I was going to the training ground every day. I was interviewing the manager, who was then Joe Royle. I was interviewing big name players like Duncan Ferguson and Anders Limpar, really good players. Neville Southall, the goalkeeper. And that year, Everton won the FA Cup, summer 1995. It's the last time we won a trophy. They actually won a cup, the FA Cup. And then I went back into the Echo newsroom after they'd won that cup, and I'd written so many editions of the magazine. And the editor of the Liverpool Echo said to me, "Neil, you've done such a good job. You can have that job full time." And you know I'm a massive Everton supporter. And I said almost immediately, I said, "No, thank you." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because I don't want to typecast my career so early on. I want to learn more. I want to go into the newsroom. I want to do different things." So I questioned myself almost immediately. Have I made a mistake? That was an incredible opportunity. I could have still been there now. You know, I might have been the head of communications or something. I could have still been at the club. I might have still been there now. And I thought, have I made a terrible mistake? Was that your bad idea? But I think that was a good idea, because I went on to become the crime reporter in Liverpool, to work on the paper in Bermuda and follow my dad's footsteps, to work on the News of the World, which was the biggest selling English language newspaper in the world, to work for the BBC Sport, and interview people like David Beckham and Johnny Wilkinson, to work for ITV News as sports producer, to work on Premier League productions at IMG and become the executive producer of the global Premier League output. And I would have missed all those opportunities had my career taken that different path. I guess it's like sliding doors. It's that film, isn't it? Sliding doors. So I remember talking to my dad, and who obviously was an inspiration to me. And he said, "Neil, don't regret it." He said, "Whatever decision you make," he said, "you must always back any decision you make, because it was the right decision at that time." And so that was perhaps a bad idea that became a very good idea. But yeah, I did question it for a while.
Wow. I didn't expect that one. To be honest, I didn't expect that one, because if you ask any fan if they can have the chance to work for their favorite team, I mean, they will say it's a no-brainer, yes. But then reflecting the way you do it, wow. I mean, you had an amazing career, and at the same time, you have your Everton, right? You're so beloved Everton because you have it anytime you want,
But that's it,
and
yeah.
then
That's it. I
and
haven't lost. I haven't lost Everton. They're
yeah.
still they're in there. They're in there in my heart. But I thought that going to work for them so early on was perhaps not the best move.
And no, it's because I love it so much. It's so beloved for me that I don't want to know the behind the scenes. That all, you
Completely.
know,
And the people that maybe you don't get on with so well, and it becomes a job, not your absolute passion, your
yes,
love. So that was why I made that decision. Could have been a bad idea. I think it ended up a good one.
yes, amazing, amazing that one. Oh, I appreciate it so much, Neil. I appreciate it because
Thank you, Juan.
I appreciate your time, your honesty, your camaraderie, and always like you being so honest and so open about everything. I think that everyone who's going to listen today, they're going to love each and every second of the interview and every second of this podcast. It was amazing, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Juan. Lovely to see you. Really lovely to see you. And I hope I'll see you again soon.
For sure, we will. So, uh, without further ado, I'm not gonna take in more time of your precious time. So I'm gonna let you go now, and thank you again, man.
Thanks, Juan.
See you around.